So, Tom, I'm really happy to have you having a conversation with us today. Tom, can you tell us a bit about yourself for anyone who doesn't know who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a registered dietitian. I work both clinically and with sports clients. So with sports clients, I love working with endurance sport clients, particularly runners. And I would say my main niche within that would be marathon runners. So I do get a lot of clients that are working towards a marathon, and that might be their first marathon, or it might be their 50th marathon, or something in between. And it's an area that I really, really enjoy working with because it's also my own main passion. So I've been steadily increasing my own mileage and my own dedication towards running. So I've run, I think, maybe 16, 17 marathons, something like that. I recently broke the 2 hour 30 barrier for the first time, which had been a goal for a while. And I have represented my age group for England in the marathon for the last couple of years as well. So, yeah, it's just an area that I really love working in.
Super interesting to actually run marathons yourself, so you really know exactly what you're talking about because it's not just theory for you, it's like literally you've done it, you've experienced it yourself. Talking about marathon runners, like obviously you have beginners and you have more experienced. What is the single biggest nutrition mistake you see across those ability levels?
In terms of nutrition mistakes that you see in beginners and seasoned marathon runners, there's not always a clear distinction between the two, actually, but you do see a lot of the same mistakes being made across the board. I would say one thing that I see potentially a bit more with seasoned runners is they're just a bit stuck in their ways because perhaps they're still working on quite outdated evidence, outdated science. They're not fueling themselves adequately. Might be a bit too much fasted training going on that's doing a disservice to their training. And then they wonder why they're low energy and they're not getting the training adaptation that they want. But also, a lot of them just haven't really realized how much the science of marathon nutrition has moved on. And so they haven't yet really used that low hanging fruit for performance gains that is just there to be taken. Whereas for beginner runners, I would potentially say one of the first things that they do wrong is not making their nutrition different from what you might consider a healthy diet. So if you're about to embark on a marathon for the first time, then you really need to be changing your nutrition because your eating requirements are going to be significantly different to someone who leads a relatively sedentary or a standard amount of exercise in their life. Things are about to change if you're going to run a marathon.
And if I was preparing for a marathon, my first ever marathon, how many months in advance would you say I'd have to change my nutritional plan? Is it 6 months? Is it a whole year? I know sometimes you have to sign up to marathons a whole year before they start. Is that the best time to start with better nutrition, or is it something you can leave until the last quarter?
In terms of when to start putting nutrition changes in place before a marathon, it's a really good question, actually. I would generally say the earlier the better to start thinking about it. One thing that I do see is, and it can be a bit frustrating actually, is when clients come to me and it's not too late because there's always improvements that I can help make. But if it's 2 weeks before the race, it leaves me a bit frustrated because I feel like, oh, we could have done so much optimization here if you'd come to me a month ago, even, let alone a bit longer. But like you say, races are so popular these days that they're selling out months and months, if not nearly a year in advance. So people often know a long time in advance when they're going to be running. A lot of people go into running with the aim of losing weight as well. And one thing that I would say here is there's nothing wrong with that, but actually you want to be looking after the body composition and weight management side of nutrition much, much earlier. So kind of 6 months out, if not more, because when you get into the marathon training block itself, the specific block, you don't want to be worrying about any sort of calorie deficit because you want to be maximizing your energy for that training and for those long runs in particular. So I would say, you know, as early as possible to start considering your nutrition, but bare minimum, you want to be doing 2, 3, maybe 4 months out.
Wow, super interesting. Gastrointestinal distress is quite common during endurance running. How can runners balance fueling properly without upsetting the gut?
Yeah, so gastrointestinal symptoms and distress is really common in endurance sport and particularly in running. Um, and that's kind of due to a few different factors, but one of the key things that differentiates it from cycling, for example, is that repetitive bounce, bounce, up, down motion that just unsettles the gut, unsettles the stomach. And that's on top of the impact of the reduced blood flow to the gut, which happens with endurance, prolonged exercise, meaning that, these symptoms can occur, particularly if you're prone to them in everyday life as well. And the main thing to consider here is practice. And this is one of the main reasons why it is so important to start thinking about your nutrition a long time before race week itself. And that's things like what race day breakfast is going to work well and sit well, and what timings do you need in order to digest that? What level of carb load are we aiming for that's going to be well tolerated? Thinking about different carbohydrate types, thinking about fiber, thinking about hydration. And then when it comes to what you're taking on during the race itself, for a lot of people, this is going to be gels or maybe sports drinks. So there might be a bit of trial and error involved because they all contain slightly different ingredients. Some of them might contain caffeine as well, for example. So every client is going to be slightly different, but this is where I can help massively as a registered dietitian with lots of GI expertise as well.
Perfect. So moving on to GI health in general now. So with people now struggling more with IBS and bloating, what are the biggest mistakes that you see when they try to fix their gut health by themselves using different, supplements you get in supermarkets and stuff, compared to actually seeing a professional? Like, what's the difference that you see?
Yes, so gut health and GI health is, high on people's agenda at the moment. And I think that's a really good thing because we are just starting to understand and learn that the gut microbiome is really, really important to health. I think we're getting there already, but I think over the next 10 years, it's going to be one of the most important advances in health is understanding the individuality of people's microbiome and what elements of health that might potentially influence. So I'm really glad that people are focusing on it. IBS is being diagnosed a bit more readily, which is a good thing. So people aren't suffering in silence anymore. I would say one thing that people are doing potentially is believing what they read on social media and not using credible resources. And there is so much competing information out there. A lot of it is from people who really, they're not qualified to talk about it. And yet they talk in such a compelling way that people will believe that. And they might be selling supplements or products that should not be the first port of call. There are so many things that could be tried and tested from a behavioral perspective, from a mental perspective, and from a food-based perspective first, before you start reaching for the supplements and medications, definitely.
That's super important, I think, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. Talking about misinformation, I just want to quickly touch on nutrition and cancer. So there is a lot of information and misinformation around nutrition and cancer. From a dietitian's perspective, what does the evidence actually say about diet during cancer treatment?
Yeah, diet and cancer is definitely another area where there is a lot of misinformation, and as you can imagine, it's a really emotional area for the patients and the families affected. And because everyone eats, everyone has an opinion, and it might be that if you're a patient or a family going through cancer treatment, it might be one area that you feel that you can control, and one thing that I have seen clinically over the years that really should be avoided is, again, believing everything that you read on social media, unless it's a credible account, and potentially going for diets that are overly restrictive. Because I've seen many people be admitted to hospital intensive care during my clinical work, and they're in a compromised nutritional status. And that is unfortunately because they've been trying to restrict their diet in certain areas that's not especially evidence-based, and possibly done more harm than good in terms of making them resilient to the therapy or the surgery that they're about to have. There are positive things that can be done in terms of optimizing your nutrition for cancer treatment and prevention itself. But again, it's all about just avoiding that misinformation and finding credible sources.
We have two different diets. I mean, there's obviously the meat-based diet and plant-based diets. In terms of meat-based diets first, so we've seen a rise in bowel cancer recently, and wondering if the whole thing about red meat, eating too much red meat is not good for your bowel, and does that actually cause cancer? Is that a myth, or is there a correlation?
In terms of the link between meat intake and cancer incidence, there is some evidence for this, yes. And red meat and processed meat have long been discussed as potential increases of cancer risk in bowel cancer in particular. That doesn't mean that if you eat a small amount of red meat or processed meat, you're going to get bowel cancer. But there is a level of increased risk if that is, forming a large part of your diet. So many people would benefit from a more plant-based dietary approach, and it's something that I have expertise in training people and coaching people how to transition to a plant-based diet without introducing new nutrient deficiencies, which can be an issue if you're removing food groups from the diet. And that might mean switching from more animal-based proteins to plant-based proteins. So beans, pulses, nuts, seeds, tofu, things like that.
Perfect. Well, Tom, thank you so much for this conversation. It's given me a lot of information and a lot of food for thought. So thank you so much for coming, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Thanks so much.